Hi there, and welcome back to Straight Talk for Mental Health. I'm Karen Goslin of KG and Associates. I'm here with my associate Janice D'Souza, and we are talking about school. It is that time of the year. I often think of that Walmart commercial. It's the most wonderful time of the year when parents are so happy their kids are getting back into routine. We work a lot with students at all levels, young school age children, high school students, post-secondary students. It's a big part of the work that we do. And I also know that the Tuesday after Labor Day is a big deal. Even if you're not a student, it tends to be kind of a benchmark time of the year. But we really wanted to talk today about how to get ready for the return to school. So welcome, Janice. How are you doing? And what are you starting to think about with this topic?
Yeah, good, Karen. I'm really excited about this topic because, as you know, I do specialize in working with children, adults, teenagers, young adults as well. And it's such an exciting but challenging time as well. And a lot more conversations with my clients are coming up about, the stress of getting back to school, along with the excitement, things to look forward to. But I'm super excited to see, where this podcast goes today.
Yeah, I think I think all of us almost have like the end of the summer blues,
Yeah,
It's like I've heard people saying, yeah, it's getting, like it gets darker earlier,
I
the
know.
it gets shorter. And then I know you liked one of my posts earlier this week because it was like, well, listen, summer's not over till September
Yeah.
2nd. So, sit your, pumpkin spice latte down and I sip my margarita. And it was like, yeah, we were talking about this last night because I remember moving to university like every year. I would move back on campus or off campus, but away from home. And it was always so hot that day, like the week that we were moving. So the weather's still good, but yeah, summer is winding down and school is getting ramped up, and it's a big change for everybody. And like you said, it's exciting. Most for most of the students we work with, we want to promote that they're picking their programs, picking
Mhm.
their courses, finding some uh, reason to be back at school, and I know sometimes that can be tricky. But also, it can come with higher levels of anxiety. One, because it's such a huge change from what we've been doing over the summer, but also it's kind of like performance anxiety, social anxiety, how we're going to change our whole routine. So I think it's really good that we're doing this and, continue to be committed to the students we work with. So let's just jump into it. So you and I were just chatting, and I really wanted to focus the information that we talk about today
Mhm.
because sometimes everything is kind of swirling around us and we don't really know where to ground any
Yeah.
of it. And then it actually just makes us feel more anxious. So we'll be putting this in the description of our podcast so that it'll have a written content to our publishing of this podcast so that any listeners, whether you're a student or a
Mhm.
parent of a student, you can follow along, not just in terms of what you're hearing us talk about, but have it written out. And I know we do that a lot with our clients because we want to make the theory applicable, so that we know what we're doing differently when we wake up tomorrow. So when we publish it, I'll put all this in writing, at least a summary of it, so
Mhm.
that it's going to be kind of a clear go-to. So what we've come up with is the acronym READY, right? READY. And I want that to give the information out, in terms of what you and I know and our expertise and experience in this field about what we know can be really helpful.
Yeah.
So the R, we wanted to stand for routine. So tell me about the work you're doing with your students and what routine might mean for you as a therapist.
Yeah, so the work with the students and for me as a therapist, routine is really, I think it's that transition, especially from going from summer holidays where it's vacation, your, sleep schedules are all over, eating's all over, everything really. It's just summer, right? So it's reestablishing the routine from when students are going from summer to starting school again. And like you said, Karen, a perfect time is like to challenge yourself to get back into that right on the Tuesday after Labor's Day. So, like we talked about using the last week of summer maybe to really establish what routine will look like. And I think it's so important with routine to address the self-care portion of it, right? Get back into that sleeping schedule, make sure you're getting that good number of hours of sleep so you're ready for the next school day or whatever the next day has, what you have planned for the next day, maintaining that balanced, healthy diet for yourself, incorporating regular exercise into your routine. Because with school, often there is a lot of burnout in terms of the academic pressures and the work there. So, maintaining the exercise, maintaining the social part of it. So really just having that healthy balance and staying healthy, is what like routine kind of looks like for me.
Yeah, I know. Like sometimes people think, ah, routine, it's so boring, it's so
Yeah.
monotonous. I have to do the same thing every day. But you're raising a good point because when we can get behind the power of a healthy routine, there's actually nothing boring about it because we feel that empowerment of knowing what we're doing to take care of ourselves. And then it just feels better. So then we actually feel committed, or attached to the routine in a really healthy, powerful way. It doesn't have to be so boring. Um, I particularly like what you're saying here about sleep, and for any students or parents of students out there, we know that trying to change our body clock can be like sometimes the hardest thing ever. That's why there's jet lag, right? So maybe I don't know, maybe there's a summer lag here for students starting into school, but generally speaking, because it's such a delicate change to make, I will always recommend to clients changing, if they need to, change their sleep bedtime 30 minutes a week.
Yeah.
Because if we're needing to go later or earlier, if we do it all in kind of one big sweep, our brain's like, what the heck's going on?
Hmm.
So if it's not too late by the time our podcast is published, then yeah, it's that idea of gradually doing it. Because literally,
Yeah.
we are at the what, 10-day mark of like the
Yes.
but you're right, because it's so jarring when all of a sudden that alarm goes off. And I know we see this a lot with clients, especially when there's depression or a lack of motivation or upsets around attachments in the family. School avoidance can be a huge issue. um,
Hmm.
kind of crossing over with the sleep management, because that avoidance of the school will look like snooze, snooze, snooze.
Yes.
And the next thing you know, you've missed first class, and then it just kind of tumbles from there. And I know you and I both know that it's a lot harder to correct it months later.
Hmm.
Already so behind and I'm already getting bad marks. And then it's like we're just building that, momentum and that spiral downward, where it's so much harder to kind of regroup, and so much easier to kind of keep it organized from the very beginning. So for listeners out there, part of the R in ready for routine will in a large part due to sleep management, but obviously committing to healthy diet, regular exercise, and yeah, having a good leisure component, which actually takes us right into the E for ready, which is extracurriculars. And I know you and I were just kind of talking about that, going, is that applicable? Like, do we really want to emphasize that? Because aren't we talking about school here? And you're like, no, Karen, this is important. So yeah, for our listeners, maybe you can share with them what you just shared with me about how important the extracurriculars are.
Yeah, I think just with going back to school, like there's a huge piece on just social anxiety, right? And maintaining that healthy academic but social life balance. So I think by joining extracurriculars, whether that's clubs or sports or just other, group activities, it's so helpful for not just balance really, because you spend all these days in classes, you're using your brain, you're studying all of that. But what about, where's that detachment? Where's your downtime where it might just be nice to join some of these clubs activities? And I think it also takes away from the fact that, it kind of lessens anxiety in a way where you're getting that opportunity to also meet some people, who share similar interests as you, right? Because when you join clubs, groups, it's often like you're meeting other people with shared interests, shared likes, and you can also learn from each other. And I think it's a great way to connect with other teachers, peers, classmates, or just other students, especially in university, I would say. I find university is a lot harder to make those friends because it's so huge. But when you get into these groups, you kind of, the group narrows down and you start to meet like-minded people, which is really helpful too. So I really did appreciate the E, especially in Ready.
Yeah, 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 exactly. And it reminds me of the conversations we had during COVID. And I remember
Yeah.
feeling so bad for the student clients I was working with at the time, where there weren't even online activities available
Yeah.
on the university campuses, so they were literally like locked in their room. But
I
yeah,
know.
it refreshes the brain. I mean, you and I, we all can see what happens, when we've been really busy, or things
Yeah.
are kind of like in a very serious, studious way, and then you go refresh your brain, because it's like you expose yourself to something completely different, that's interactive, because I know for mental health we push, you're not at home or school, you're interacting with at least one other person, and you're in non-problem talk zone. And we know for brain health, this is so critical.
Hmm.
We really do need to expose our brain to something completely different outside of studying, to kind of like just lighten it, and just completely change the
Yeah.
energy. And I know there's kind of a bit of a battle out there. I hear it all the time, where, what happened to, millennials, and the new generation, and the parents are overscheduling their kids. And yeah, so I do think there's a bit of a balance. And I think well-meaning parents, we grew up in knowing and understanding how important it was for our kids to have different activities. But yeah, not overdoing it. I think that's kind of maybe sometimes more for the parents than the students.
Yep.
Well-meaning parents, because we want them to kind of have it all and be exposed to sports and culture and
I
arts.
know.
Um, but I do know, like, even when my daughter was growing up, she was an elite swimmer, and I remember being worried. Oh gosh, like, how will she get through school when we're spending so
Yep.
much time at the swimming pool? And then somebody told me that busy students are more efficient.
Hmm.
And I guess this goes for anybody, busy people. It's not so much about we're losing time, because we're running a rigorous schedule. And so the idea of wasting time is almost not an option.
Yeah.
So apart from kind of exposing our brain to different energy, it could actually help us be more efficient, because we've got it not to over program, but we've got times for this and times for that. So it can really help with that efficiency.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned how important it is, to be interacting and in social places. Oftentimes we do see high levels of social anxiety. So
Hmm.
sometimes we have to really be kind of biting off a baby step of what's
Yeah.
one thing you're interested in. And by virtue of even just showing up at that activity, you already have something
Yeah.
in common with the other people. So let's launch into the A of anxiety management, because social anxiety is part of that. We also see performance anxiety at
Yeah.
exams and tests, and just the anxiety of being in a new environment for those students making transitions, to high school or to college or university, where nothing looks familiar.
Yeah.
And if there's any pre-existing anxiety, it will easily piggyback on not
Yes.
feeling in control, or not feeling like worthy, or self-confident to manage that transition. What have you noticed is helpful in helping students with anxiety?
So I think I've noticed like taking smaller steps has been helpful because a lot of times pressures for whether that's pressures regarding academics or just socially as well, is what causes a lot of anxiety for students. So really with clients I've worked with, it's really about breaking it down into smaller realistic goals. So
Mhm.
it's like, okay, what would I like to focus on for the first week of school, for example? Do I really want to just kind of focus on getting back into that routine? So touching on the R again. Maybe the second week, I'll start to go out to some social groups and join some clubs to meet others. So I really noticed that when students all of a sudden come in and they're like, whoa, we have all of these classes, this is all going on. They're kind of, they start ruminating and they're all over the place. But it's like, okay, let's breathe, let's pause, and let's just break this up into smaller goals for yourself. And then it's kind of I think it's easier for them to kind of have those smaller steps towards achieving those goals as opposed to all at once. And a lot of times I notice with anxiety, it can lead to a lot of procrastination as well, because you're so anxious about getting started, or you have this worry that you're not enough or you won't do it well enough. So often it gets pushed away. So even addressing that procrastination piece, really challenging students' thoughts. And I know we do this in our work with stinky thinking, right? It's very connected to that procrastination, what students are kind of telling themselves to put off the task or the work. So really addressing those things, I think, is so important.
Yeah. So, yeah, when you're talking about the smaller steps, it reminds me of when I'm coaching clients when they move, because they're excited to move to a new house, and I always say, all you have to know by the end of that first day is where your bed is, right?
Yes. I love that.
That night. And so I guess, yeah, sometimes with students, it's kind of like, especially if they're rotating for the first time. I know we see a lot of anxiety with
Yeah.
students who are making that move to rotating to different classrooms for different subjects. And it's kind of like get the map of the school if it's a new school, and I know the school board's doing a lot better job with this, it seems, where they were offering credit courses during the summer to get oriented to the new school for
Yeah.
students high school. I thought that's a brilliant idea because the transition after Labor Day must be so much easier because as part of that orientation was even just figuring out how to get around the school and where
Hmm.
are and where your locker will be, and it's like sounds like it's very kind of just logistical
Yeah.
piece, but actually it gives us a sense of control because we just know a little bit more, otherwise everything is new. But yeah, breaking it down into goals of like what do you want to kind of figure out the first week and then the second week, because otherwise, as with all of us, if we're facing something hard and we look at all of it's a bit overwhelming, and then anxiety gets hold of us in a way that won't work. And I also I agree with what you're saying. I almost feel like there's an epidemic out there, and I don't know if it's because of COVID. I think we were seeing it before COVID, and maybe it's worse, where procrastination and avoidance is just
Yeah.
so huge, and it never feels good for the students. And I know it drives the parents crazy, and I did a post some months ago about bed rotting. So like a new, it'll probably be the Webster word of the year or something, I don't know, but bed rotting, where students were just getting overly attached to their bedrooms and not getting out. And what is like challenging for them to fight against the bed rotting to get into school. So the stinky thinking of procrastination, right? We see it again and again, and it is that way of how we trick ourselves into believing we should put off, or it'd be better to put off, or overestimate. I've got more time, I can do it later. And it really is almost one of the most common pieces I think we see when there is that spiral downward to getting
Yeah.
behind. So it's really about using a good cognitive restructuring program to know how to combat those stinky thoughts. Because unless you unstink the stink, right, we are living in a stinky world. And, even though we might think we feel better in the moment to avoid, it ends up feeling a lot worse. And what I'm seeing more and more as a family therapist is the need to really help the parents support their child or
Yeah.
teen CBT, because otherwise I think it's so easy because parents are so upset to not see the small steps their students are taking, or how to support their CBT practice, because
Yeah.
otherwise parents walk past the bedroom, see that their kid is still in the room, and then they have an outburst, just reflective of their own state of being overwhelmed or upset. And then there's just a huge regression for the student because they're like, my mom doesn't get me, or they don't understand.
Yes.
And then,
Hmm.
then I think it reduces their motivation, don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So D in ready is daily time management. And I know I'm a big believer in this, of the online calendar, coding subjects, so that at a glance students can see what they've got coming down, and the art of
Hmm.
partializing of because I think what gets really hard, especially for those who are struggling with executive functioning skills, where organization and time management is like almost like an alien language.
Yeah.
I love the visuals of the online calendar and color coding it and then using it for short term and long term, because before you know it, there's a million moving parts in
Yeah.
different subjects, short term and long term, and it's completely overwhelming. So, daily time management for me is all about the partializing and the time management of breaking things down, kind of what you were saying earlier
Yeah.
around smaller steps. Um, but because it's kind of at a glance, you can see what your kind of appointment you've made with yourself
Hmm.
in terms of what should be gonna be getting focused on for that day. What else comes up for you around daily time management? Like, what do you try to work on with your students around this?
Yeah, so actually, even for myself, I remember when I was in university, they had those big calendars that you could put up in your dorm. And it was almost like the calendar was me holding myself accountable to myself in a way. And I love what you say about the color coding. And that's something I would even encourage, like along with the online calendar. I know sometimes students just prefer if it's in your face. So even getting one of those like bigger visual calendars that you have up on your dorm, and then, not just noting down like school tasks, but even the extracurriculars. So you kind of color code like, okay, this is what I have this week. Like, and kind of focusing it that way. And then maybe even little daily tasks, right? Like meal prepping, all of that. Like, so kind of just, really what you're saying, Karen, with the overall calendar, having everything thrown in there, color coded, is something that I used a lot, and I thought it was really helpful. And I'd encourage students as well.
Yeah, and I'm always surprised because I assume millennials just need to have the technology, but you're talking about these calendars on the wall, and I can't tell you how often I've heard about this lately. People get having these whiteboards,
Yeah.
and and even parents and kids talking about having the boards on the wall. So it's interesting to me because I automatically think, okay, it's got to be digital, it's got to be having the technology, but yeah, it does seem like and then there's probably a cathartic piece to it because you put something on,
Yeah.
then you can like literally wipe it off.
Wipe it off. Yeah.
And if it's one of those calendars where, okay, this is like September, then, you kind of flip it over to October. So yeah, I can see how that would be. It just surprises me because I guess I assume that everybody in that generation wants to work on it in a technical way. But staying committed. So yeah, you just used a great word, which is accountability. And when there are struggles, it's almost like we let ourselves down.
Yeah.
And then whether we're conscious of it or not, then we start to feel depleted, or not good enough, or we feel like failures. I keep hearing that word a lot lately, and failure, and how much, what the weight of that is when we start to identify ourselves that way. So I think, when there's a good rhythm in your family, there is a good daily kind of
Hmm.
schedule almost. And as much as we might fight against it, if we stick to it in any consistent way, it starts to kind of breathe fresh air into our day and we start to feel organized. But we do really need to look at whether there's any attention deficit that's getting in the way, any attachment issues with family. That seems to be almost the number one reason kids will avoid school.
Yeah.
Um, and any other executive functioning tools that we can offer. We're seeing a lot of psychoeducational assessments identifying that, as a piece in the overall kind of way of functioning that is difficult. So without the executive functioning, we really do need to be creative about the tools we come up with that's going to help get that into a better place. So we're down to our last one, which is the why. And we decided we wanted to make this represent your supports because oftentimes, right, we can't do it alone. We can't go it alone. And, it's like, what's that village or support network we
Yeah.
have around us to be our go-tos when we are in trouble? Because even if we kind of do our best on all of those earlier pieces, something can throw us off where students either fail a test, or there's a teacher that they're not getting along with, or a teacher that isn't providing enough structure, and
Yeah.
um, or something else goes happening in the family, right? Where whatever is going on might have, a negative impact. So having support. So what do you talk about with your student clients? Like what's your idea here about supports?
Yeah, so same thing. Like I really encourage students in that population not to hesitate to reach out for help or support when they are struggling or they need it. I think a lot of times, sometimes there's that resistance to get support as well, whether that's academically, like approaching teachers or tutors or other classmates. Sometimes students, it comes back to that failure, right? They have that internal piece where it's like, I don't want to ask for the help, but really I encourage them to do it because it's better to get that support when you need it than prolonging it and then it gets worse for yourself, right? So reaching out to teachers, classmates, family, friends, whoever that looks like. And then on the other end, there's also reach out to the mental health supports, right? Because there is the anxiety around socially, academic pressures,
Yeah.
depression, school struggles, stress management. So all of that. So even knowing who the mental health resources are around on campus, if you are on campus, or just, even outside of that in the community. And something that I really liked what you said was the village, who's in your village. And I think I might do that with students getting into school year, maybe getting them to create like, okay, you're in the center. I want you to tell me who's in your little village, who can you turn to for support, and have that for them as they get into the school year. So I really like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because we can't usually go it alone and then we feel alone and then it just feels worse. And I'm always talking to students about the extra help teachers provide. And I don't know why that is so hard. I like I'll often hear like, yeah, the teacher has after hours I don't feel like those are utilized as
No.
could be. And, we have to kind of, I guess, look at each unique case about why that's happening. But otherwise, I know, there's peer mentors in school. And sometimes, I guess, sometimes, especially teenagers, they prefer
Yeah.
to get help by another student and
Mhm.
students that are kind of at a higher level in the classroom, student teachers even
Yeah.
that are closer to the age of that student. It seems as though students are more likely to kind of turn to the student teacher or the peer
Mhm.
mentor, and then yeah, reaching out online for help. And I do think I'm hearing more and more about child and youth workers in the school.
Mhm.
And again, maybe it's an age thing with that as well, because the child and youth students tend to be closer in age to the students in high school, and they tend to have good rapport with those
Yeah.
supports. And then sometimes those supports are helping facilitate referrals to places like what we have, in terms of actually getting into the nitty gritty about what's really going on in a mental health type of way. So yeah, so this is good. And yeah, I suppose the other support I just want to mention again is that the importance of the family work that
Mhm.
oftentimes we're seeing the need to broaden our work to include parents or siblings, because usually, the breakdown with the schoolwork is a symptom, right, of some bigger issues systemically in
Yeah.
the family where there's been loss or trauma or conflicts, that have taken a real toll. So I'm always excited when we can expand the work and that people come in, knowing that, it's more common than we realize
Mhm.
that there are breakdowns when we don't really intend it to be or want it to be. And we can, um, deal with the symptom of the schoolwork issues in that kind of here and now way. But yeah, getting underneath what's really
Yes.
going on seems to be a big turning point, right? Um, and what that means to people. So, all right, so get ready. Routine, extracurriculars, anxiety management, daily time management, and your supports. I think that's a great recipe. I'm
Yes.
excited that we could get this in before the Labor Day. After the Labor Day, the Tuesday, which is like I say, it's almost like January 1.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, big change here. And are you ready for the change in routine? What did you know that worked last school year that you want to remind yourself to do? And where were some of the pitfalls? So we'll put this out here. We'll write out the steps in our description, and hopefully that means something to our listeners, whether you're a student or a parent of a student. For mental health support, you can reach out to KG and Associates. I'm Karen Goslin at 647-985-0633 and at KarenRSW@yahoo.ca. And Janice, how will parents or students find you?
So you can reach me at my email at j6dsouza@gmail.com, or my direct line, which is 416-316-7686.
Perfect. That's great. Enjoy your weekend, and hopefully the listeners will find this useful. Take care.
Thanks, Karen.